Welcome back, friendlies, to another video. Axel here, and today's video is something a little different. Today's video is my top 10 favorite fighting game franchises of all time. Now, I was originally going to do just individual games, but quickly realized that it would have turned this into like some kind of top 50 video, so I decided to lump them into franchises. Fighting games have been a huge part of my life, and some of the best times I've had hanging with my friends growing up. At one time, we even made championship titles for different games because we used to play them every day. There was a few years where the fighting game genre kind of went away, but they have made a huge comeback in the last few years with some of the franchises that are still going. So what better way to celebrate this amazing genre of games than to give you my favorite list. So without further ado, here's number 10. Dead or Alive. Dead or Alive has some fun characters, but where it really shines is the unique combat style compared to the rest of my list. In DOA, you have essentially two attack buttons and a grab, sort of like Virtua Fighter, but you also have the ability to counter punches and kicks by holding either forward or back while hitting the reverse button. This can make for some really cool sequences, especially if you're taking on someone who is good at it. When my friends and I used to play, we would do offbeat punches and kicks just to try to throw the other player off. Also, Dead or Alive was one of the first fighting games to really go hardcore with stage transitions. You could knock your opponents through walls and even down mountains. A lot of the games that never use stage transitions have implemented them over the years. As for the cast of characters, well, if you're watching this video, you probably already know that DOA goes overboard with the skimpy outfits for the women. So much so that for some it has left a bad taste over the years. But underneath all the boobs and ass, there is a fun cast of characters to learn. I used to love playing Genfu with my friends because he had a move where he could catch an opponent in the air and gently set them down on the ground. It was so funny and used to piss my friends off. The Dead or Alive franchise, under all those naughty outfits and bouncy boobs, is a fun fighting game that can be very unpredictable given the right opponents, but because the developers seem to be more interested in making bikini and maid outfits, that is why it falls to my number 10. Number 9. Guilty Gear. Do you like a cast of badass characters? Do you listen to metal music? Do you like playing as guys that wear way too many belts? Then boy, do I have a game for you. The Guilty Gear games have been around for years and easily have my favorite music in a fighting game, but I do like metal music. Shooting flames and taking names, that's what Soul says, am I right? Right? One thing that has always made this franchise stand out is the anime art style and crazy character designs. I mean, they literally have a guy named Bedman who fights with his bed. I've always been more drawn to the anime look in fighting games. Sometimes during moves it feels like you're watching a show instead of playing a game. Another standout for this franchise is that it has an interesting story compared to most fighting games. It's about this war between humans and bioweapons that they call gears, which are essentially like cyborgs. Only downside is the last few games, they took out the gameplay in the story mode, so you just watch the story play out in cutscenes. Another thing they decided to remove with the newest game was the instant kill moves, which was one of my favorite things to pull off in the Guilty Gear games. Oh, what's that? You're fixing to lose? Don't think so. Hit an instant kill and win a round. These moves are flashy as hell and fun to watch. Here's to hoping they return in the future releases. Another thing I've always appreciated about Guilty Gear is the amount of game modes they give you to play with. One of my favorite was MOM mode, or Mom mode, where you fight through a board of opponents and they drop items for you like gold and health. You also get to work your character's stats as you go. I used to play the hell out of this mode. Guilty Gear is like Trigun on meth. It's crazy to play and even funner to watch. Number 8, Street Fighter. Now before you attack me for having it so low on this list, I will tell you me and Street Fighter games have a love-hate relationship. On one hand, when Street Fighter is scratching that itch, it's solid, but really that varies from game to game. Part of it could be that I feel this franchise gets way more love than it deserves, and maybe part of it is they rest on their laurels sometimes, but let's get into it. Street Fighter is considered the GOAT of fighting games generally by everyone who doesn't play many fighting games. Does Street Fighter have solid gameplay? Hell yes. You go to an arcade, you play online, you get some really strategic back and forth fights that can be nail biters. But that's also because they don't do a lot of changing for the most part. One of my gripes about this franchise is how they don't take any risks for the most part. For years it was same basic characters, same basic modes, same let's throw Super Arcade Edition on it and sell the same game crap.
I'm ready for a fight when it's on its own. I'm charging like a bull when it's on its own.
Now, there have been exceptions, of course. Like Street Fighter 6, where they finally decided they needed to step out of their comfort zone and do something a little different, and it worked great. World Tour was easily my favorite mode they've added in years, but it took them releasing a half-assed product that was Street Fighter V for everyone to realize what I've been saying about this franchise for years. Honestly, if Street Fighter 6 wasn't as good as it was, it probably would have fell behind Guilty Gear for me. But when Capcom wants to make a banger, they can make it happen. One thing the Street Fighter games have always been good at, and why most people consider them the staple for the fighting game genre, is their gameplay. These games are always solid to play. They usually add maybe one new mechanic that you use for a few games, but underneath, it's the same comfort food experience that you're used to. Although some characters are kind of plain in design, there are some great fighters in this franchise, even if some have been forgotten. Fei Long. Another great thing Street Fighter games do is make characters' playstyles feel different and unique. You can usually tell what kind of player people are just based on the characters they choose to play. Aside from my gripes with this franchise, there is no doubt that the Street Fighter franchise has something magical at its core. Also, stop hating on the 90s movie, it was also magical. Number 7, Capcom vs. SNK. Now, if someone came to me and said, hey, would you rather play Street Fighter or one of the Street Fighter crossover games? 9 times out of 10, I'm going with the crossover. One of the coolest things back around the heyday for fighting games, or at least for the console versions, was the crossover games. When I said earlier that Capcom didn't like to take risks with Street Fighter, these were the exceptions. I used to always look forward to the releases of any crossover fighting games, but for my number 7, I'm talking about Capcom vs. SNK 1, and more specifically, number 2. Capcom vs. SNK took some of the biggest fighters from Street Fighter, King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and made something awesome. You had that tight gameplay from the franchises with little to no compromises. With the exception of maybe Horomaru in 2, cause that guy was overpowered as fuck. The game let you play 1v1 fights, but the main focus was 3v3 team battles, something the King of Fighter games focused on more. When I said there wasn't really any compromises in this game, I meant it. The characters played the way they did in their own franchises. They had their moves, supers, you could even pick which power gauge you preferred. As for game modes, it stuck with the basic arcade, survival, and training modes that you were accustomed to from Capcom games. One mode that was really cool and I spent more time in than I should have was the color editor mode that SNK games were kind of known for. You could basically change the color for different characters' parts like clothing, hair, even skin color. So you already know I had to make my teams with matching gear. Capcom vs SNK 2 was easily one of my favorite 2D fighting games on the PS2, and I couldn't make a fighting game list without adding it. Number 6, Tekken. The Tekken franchise has always had a special place in my heart. Not only have they made some of the best 3D fighting games, Tekken 3 was the first game I ever played with a neighborhood kid who became one of my best friends to this day. The way Street Fighter is a staple for 2D fighting games across the world, Tekken is the staple for 3D fighting games. Where Tekken excels though is they have always pushed the boundaries for the fighting game genre. They have never been afraid of taking risks like making a crazy cinematic story even before that was a thing, or adding a beat 'em up for their story mode, or mini games like bowling and volleyball. Tekken wants to keep you playing their game with content after content. Hell, still to this day Tekken is adding new innovative game modes to play like Arcade Quest and Tekken 8.
Round 1. Fight.
In case you haven't figured out, I love fighting games that give me solid gameplay along with plenty of stuff to do, and the Tekken franchise has always done that. Now, I know Tekken's gameplay isn't always everyone's cup of tea. Some things like the insane wall and ground juggles or even the hit detection can get frustrating sometimes, but at the end of the day, these games are always fun. Tekken has a great cast of characters, some weird ones like Kuma the bear or Makojin the training dummy. Most of the characters in these games are exploding with personality, and it's hard to play these games and run out of people to use. All of the characters, even if they aren't part of the main story, have their own rivalries and storylines that keep continuing throughout the games. Paul and Law always find a way to get a chuckle out of me in every game. Also, Tekken always seems to add interesting new characters with every game, that even before the game comes out, I look at them and I'm like, I can't wait to check them out. The main story with the Mishimas has gotten off the rails, but playing through the story modes are always cool. If I had to complain about Tekken games, it would be the juggles and hit detection. I understand that it's kind of become part of the game's structure now, but when you play online and someone hits you with a combo, then hits you back up off the ground into another combo through a floor, and then back into another combo before you can even move again, it gets kind of old, and hey, that's why you just play with your friends, I guess. Another thing that I love Tekken for is its customization options, and Tekken does it almost better than anyone. You get gold for doing things in the game and can use it to buy clothing, hairstyles, weapons, etc. You can really make a character of your own, almost. Tekken 6 and 7 were pretty stingy with how much gold you got, but Tekken 8 seems to have gotten better with how much they give you for things. The Tekken franchise should be celebrated for how long they have stayed in the game and how much they have pushed the genre forward. Number 5, Marvel vs. Capcom. If you were to ask someone what's the pinnacle for video game crossovers, they would probably say Smash Bros. Or maybe Fortnite. Then you would have to say, no, that's fucking wrong. It's Marvel vs. Capcom. Marvel vs. Capcom was the culmination of Capcom's video game characters and Marvel's biggest heroes and villains. The X-Men games were fun but lacked substance. The Marvel vs. Street Fighter games were also great but just needed a little more. Then we got the Marvel vs. Capcom games and they were excellent from top to bottom. They had an excellent roster from both sides. Well, I mean there was a few weird choices like Shuma or the Serve Bot, but for the most part they had the characters you wanted. These games were team based, so all the characters had assist moves that would change the way you'd set up your teams. They also had super moves that you could string together. Picking your perfect teams that balanced each other out was all part of the meta game in the franchise. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 had a crazy amount of characters to pick from, so you always had someone to use, and the fights never got boring. The combat system used characters' moves from their original games, but made them easier to use so anyone could pick it up and have fun. If I had any complaints, that would probably be my number one, was how easy the moves were. Wish they would have just stuck with using the regular movesets, but it's all part of the charm. Sometimes the battles would get so crazy it was hard to tell who was the character tagged in. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3 were the best ones from the franchise. Infinite tried to bring the franchise back after so many years, but stumbled right out the gate with the lackluster roster and the shoddy character design. If they knew they weren't getting the X-Men, they should have just put it on the back burner. The game did make a lot of good changes and added a couple good characters later, but in the end it was a little too late. I remember spending hours on the original Xbox unlocking characters and colors in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 back in the day. Anytime me and my friends go to the arcade, we always have to play Marvel vs. Capcom cabinet. Also, fuck Cable. Anytime someone used Cable on their team, we all had to add him to our teams. Those were the good old days though. Marvel vs. Capcom I feel can still make a big comeback if they just forget Infinite happened and Disney is willing to play ball since they can use the X-Men now. Also, I don't hate Smash, so don't attack me. Number 4, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 / Dragon Ball Z Fighters. So for number 4, I need you guys to hear me out on this one. I understand technically they aren't a franchise. Really, they don't have anything to do with each other, and they aren't even the same kind of fighting games. But I needed them on my list and felt this was the best way for me to lump them together, and here's why.
Now you're finished. Final flash.
Anyone that knows me knows I'm a huge sucker for anime games, for good and bad. I love being able to throw myself in those worlds and immerse myself outside just watching the shows. Growing up, the go-to anime for most of us here in America was Dragon Ball Z. Played all the early games, but they weren't as good as the Budokai games. 1 and 2 were good, but Budokai 3 was the banger for Dragon Ball Z games. The reason I am putting Budokai 3 on this list is because the Budokai games at the time were the closest we got to a legitimate fighting game. This game moved like a fighting game. It had combos, power moves, you had to learn different characters. It played more like a fighting game where you would do combos into different moves and supers. All the things that make up a good fighting game. I played the hell out of this game. The story mode was awesome, where you get to search for the Dragon Balls while you fly around the map. The story in the game was crazy. You would get capsules to unlock characters, new moves, forms for characters. You could also edit characters' moves in the Budokai games and give them your favorite super moves. This could change the way you use characters depending on the move lists you made for them. When you got the Dragon Balls, you could choose a wish from Shenron and get powerful moves. This game was everything to me back in the day. Then the Tenkaichi series came along, and while it was fun and had a lot of characters, it strayed further and further from the classic fighting game feel. For years through the PS3, the Xbox 360 era, and beyond, they all kind of used variations of that Tenkaichi gameplay. And for years, I just keep telling my friends, man, I really wish I could just get a Dragon Ball Z fighting game that was a legit fighting game.
I'm gonna blow you to bits! Fight me!
That was until 2017, the day before E3. News leaked online that the creators of Guilty Gear were making a Dragon Ball Z game, and it was going to be announced on an Xbox showcase of all places. I couldn't believe it, and when I finally saw that reveal, man, it was easily the best thing anyone showed that year. The thing I was asking for years, and it's here, Dragon Ball Z Fighters. This game is awesome visually, it's awesome to play, it has a cool story mode where you go through a board for each chapter, it had all the characters that mattered and even ones that didn't. I love Fighters and I still play it all the time. It's easy to pick up for new people, but also when you get good, they can't stop you. If there's any fighting game that is a spectator sport, it's this game. It became a huge sensation for tournaments and is still going in some places. For these reasons, they have made my number 4. Number 3, King of Fighters. The King of Fighter franchise has been around for a very long time, and the characters have been all over the place. When I first started getting into fighting games, the King of Fighter series was kind of like the franchise I wanted to build up to. To me, it was the hardcorest of fighting games. All the characters had their own play styles and lots of moves to learn. The roster itself was super deep, and the characters were rich with history. For me, the King of Fighter franchise is my comfort food for fighting games. They did new things in their games, but no matter which game I picked up to play, it just felt like home. It felt safe, in a good way. This franchise has easily some of my favorite fighting game characters of all time. My friends would always play guys like Terry, Kyo, or Kay, so I would always choose guys they weren't using as much, like Andy, Joe, Eerie, Ralph, etc. That's how strong this roster is. There are so many excellent characters to delve into. The story was always kind of predictable in the games though. Typically you do the tournament and some crazy boss shows up at the very end trying to take over the world or something. But everyone felt like they had their own reasons for entering the tournaments, kind of like Street Fighter or Tekken. Also, back on the PS2, the King of Fighter games had some of the hardest bosses I've ever faced in a fighting game. They were beatable, but cheap as fuck. The King of Fighters franchise is as solid as a fighting game can get, with excellent gameplay, plenty of modes, and an all-star cast of characters. Like I said, anytime I'm in the mood to play a fighting game, the King of Fighters franchise games are an easy pickup for me, and that's why this franchise is so high on my list. Wubba Wubba. Number 2. Soulcalibur. Now, I had to do some true soul searching when picking between these last two games. I love the Soulcalibur games. The Soulcalibur games, maybe out of all the games on this list, I feel has the most heart. This franchise isn't the oldest on my list, but gets plenty of love when people discuss fighting games. Although the game may have peaked with Soulcalibur 2 as far as its popularity, the franchise is still kicking today. They have a smaller roster compared to other games on my list, but boy are the characters' movesets deep. I could probably pick up any of the games today and still find moves I've never seen done. I really like the weapon focus for the combat where the characters all have their own signature fighting styles. Some matchups may be better than others though. For example, back when we played Soulcalibur 3, I used to say the bigger the sword, the easier it was to win. So much so that we had to pick our fighters based on who our opponents were picking. It was funny, but it did feel it was super easy to win with Siegfried or Nightmare compared to like Maxi or Taki. I don't feel it's the same that way now. I can pick up anyone and get wins. Another thing I like about Soulcalibur is a lot of the characters have different stances you can activate by hitting a couple buttons or directions. That made learning characters fun, or they had like moves you can hit on characters in certain situations. Like when they lay on the ground, that would go into like a cool animation.
You will fall here. Behold my power. It bites. It tears asunder.
You could do different combos just by learning what moves you could string into another. They also had ring outs that would make for some intense moments when your back is against the wall, or in this case, no wall at all. It was a way for my friends and I to get under each other's skins by ring outing each other when we were losing rounds. I used to love Siegfried's move where you can crouch and grab their legs because he would throw them over his head. Whenever I was getting pushed out, I would just use it. Soulcalibur's story and modes have always been top-notch. They always give you plenty of stuff to do, and since they have created characters, it allows you to feel like the world is bigger when you're fighting created characters as enemies instead of just traveling the world and fighting the same 8 people like other fighting games. That's another thing the Soulcalibur franchise is the best at, their created character suite. I spent hours making characters from different animes, shows, and other fighting games. You can basically create anyone, and the best part is you pick your fighting style from the roster. So although you're using created characters, you still learn the characters from the game. The Soulcalibur franchise, although isn't my number 1 on the list, if I was just basing everything just on overall quality, it probably would be. When I started this list, it was my number 1 from the jump. But as I thought, I had to move it behind this final game.
Taste the power of my sword! I'd hoped I wouldn't have to rely on this strength.
Number 1. Mortal Kombat. SoCal fell behind Mortal Kombat just based on the sheer quantity that they put out these games, even though not all of them are bangers. I've always respected this franchise because they aren't afraid of taking risks and pushing the genre. If you want a fighting game where you have an infinite amount of things to do and unlock, this is the franchise for you, especially the new games where they are constantly adding new things. Mortal Kombat 2 was the very first fighting game I ever remember playing as a kid. I remember going to stay at a friend's house from school, and he started playing it on his Genesis. I asked to play, and he wiped the floor with me. Although I wasn't any good at first, I was immediately pulled in by the crazy characters, moves, and the setting. The setting and story for the Mortal Kombat games is my favorite from all the games on this list. I look forward to a new game just to see where the story will go.
Bloody fatality.
Mortal Kombat 9 is the reason we have these big cinematic story modes in fighting games nowadays. I know the fighting game community kinda looked down on some of the games from the franchise, mostly the 3D PS2 games, but I had fun with them. They all had decent combat, even though they weren't balanced very well. They had fun stories and extra modes like racing, or my favorite, the chess combat from Deception. Out of the PS2 fighting games, Deception was my favorite, although Armageddon had the most characters, and I loved the Conquest mode. I wish they would bring that back. Even outside just fighting games, they tried stuff like Special Forces or Shaolin Monks. They always had other ways for you to dive into the world outside the traditional fighting game. After Mortal Kombat 9 came out, they found what really worked for them. Amazing storytelling, solid gameplay, honestly the best it's ever been, and guest characters. They have been making a huge splash with the additions of their guest characters.
That helmet makes you look like a silver tip
Superhero? Thank you. Jesus! What the hell?
From Freddy to Kratos to Rambo to a recent game adding like Peacemaker and Homelander, people go crazy for the announcements of new guest characters. Personally, I don't care for guest characters mainly because I know they won't be sticking around in the next installments, but they are fun to play with and see what they do with their moves and fatalities.
I am done apologizing!
Although it was a tough decision to put it over Soulcalibur, I feel it was the right choice. I love the world Mortal Kombat games have built over the years that even transcend past just fighting games. I really enjoyed making this list, and I will probably do another similar video down the road. Fighting games are amazing, and I'm glad to see the comeback they've made over the years. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Fatality. Homelander wins.